Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, NBA offseason grades. There's a couple of sites out there, a couple of prominent sites that did not think too fondly of the Timberwolves offseason. I'll tell you why they're wrong, and their methods to decide these grades are inconsistent at best. We'll also talk about the end of the Wolves roster again. Could they make a trade? A couple of possibilities for what they might do. There is one very minor Wolves rumor out there about a player they might have some interest in. We'll talk about all that here today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. And a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. If you listen on Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, anywhere you want to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also my Twitter account, which is at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, today on the show, I finally decided to take the plunge, look at some of these offseason grades, these free agency grades, which mostly are not well thought out, frankly, from major publications, websites, etc. Because content and that's what everybody has to do. So they got to put out these grades. The Timberwolves did not grade out well. So I'm going to complain a little bit about those. I'm going to complain about each individual method and the grade they gave the Wolves. And I'm going to be very level-headed about this because, I mean, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, I am not a Timberwolves like a blind optimist. That's not how I roll on this podcast. That's not how I roll in real life, if you will. Um, I'm also not a ridiculous pessimist. I'm not somebody who thinks everything they do is the worst. And, I think realism is the way to go, sometimes to a fault when it comes to my analysis. But that's where I'm at with this offseason for the Wolves, because I don't think you could look at this offseason and say it was a disaster because they gave up a ton of picks, or it's an absolute slam dunk. No two ways about it, because they now have the two best centers in the league, or two of the four best centers in the league. Or two top 25 players, or however you want to slice it, two all NBA centers. I think that there's some nuance here, certainly, but I also think it's way more on the positive end than the negative end. As if you listen to this podcast, I think the Gobert acquisition, even though I was against drafting another 7-footer to pair with Karl-Anthony Towns, there's a difference between drafting Walker Kessler and acquiring the best defensive 7-footer in the entire league to help shore up your two biggest areas of weakness in rebounding and rim protection. So all that to say, I've given my analysis on how I think this will work. There's plenty of podcasts now going back a full month on both ends of the floor, how I think the Gobert Towns pairing will work, how the rotations will look. I'll look at a couple of these grades and dive into why I don't agree with how the Timberwolves were graded, their offseason was graded. The one that started it for me, and I'll hit that one first because it's the one that I guess you could say grinds my gears the most, which is ESPN and Kevin Pelton, who overall is fantastic. I really like Kevin Pelton. I think he's the best analyst over at ESPN for basketball. He takes things he's very analytical, right? In everything he does, he kind of heads up the real plus minus statistic, which I really like. And I think that because he lets the numbers drive his analysis, it's generally very good. However, this particular exercise, which is NBA offseason grades, he's got every team in the West listed here, and only one team got an A, which is, ironically, the Utah Jazz. He does say he grades on a curve, with the curve as B is the most common outcome, and I'll read his methodology here. He says, the grades reflect the opportunities teams had to improve their rosters via the draft and cap space to use in free agency. I'll skip up a little bit in his explanation. He does say, it's time to take a look back at how well teams took advantage of their opportunity to upgrade their rosters for either the 22-23 season or the more distant future. Immediate improvement won't necessarily get credit if it comes at the expense of long-term results. Then he moves on to talk about graded on a curve. And then he says, quote, teams don't necessarily get credit for having a high draft pick or cap space as the product of past moves. And This is important. And the draft isn't weighted as heavily as moves involving NBA veterans because of our uncertainty about prospects. Okay. I love the idea behind that methodology because I think often we way too value rookies. I talked about Bill Simmons on The Ringer. I think this was 2 weeks ago. He did his annual trade value podcast, and there's actually a column on it as well. Um, and he had like 7 or 8 first round picks in his like top 40 in trade value, which is crazy to me because I get the exercise. You're trying to predict what their trade value is, but we don't know who any of these guys are going to be. Like you look at any given year, the rookie of the year usually isn't who you think it's going to be, and that's the quickest and dirtiest example. You could go down the list of first round picks and how many surprises there are late in the first round. And I guess sitting here right now, the whole point of trade value is you think that somebody's worth more than somebody else because of where they were picked in part. But all that to say, Pelton basically hits the nail on the head here, where it also is beneficial for us to not overweight draft picks in general because we don't know anything about rookies. Whereas we know with relative certainty how good an NBA, and there's of course, it's a little bit subjective, but we do know how good some NBA players are and who's better than who else. And like obviously there's debate and all that stuff, but we have data to back up what a current NBA player looks like. So with all that to say, what do you think he graded the Timberwolves? He gave the Timberwolves a C minus for the offseason. He right after saying that the draft picks are not as weighted as heavily as current NBA talent. I know that we're not just talking about one draft pick. We're talking about 4 plus a swap plus Kessler. I get that. Um, but that's still not right. I mean, I mean, if we're saying like it doesn't get much more extreme than talking about a player. We're not just talking about a current NBA veteran like Kyle Anderson, a really nice player, another player the Wolves acquired. Who's going to play a lot of minutes for this team, basically be their sixth man. And we're not talking about, Malik Beasley, somebody who we know what he is as an NBA player. He's no longer on the team. We can value him. We're talking about Rudy Gobert, who is, by any account, a top 25 NBA player, a top 3 NBA defender, a 3-time defensive player of the year, a multiple-time All-NBA player and All-Star. We're not talking about a rotation guy. We're talking about a superstar. And we're talking about a lot of first-round picks. So if we can't weight that, like, I just don't understand how we have to weight it so heavily towards if picks don't matter as much because we don't know what they're going to turn into. I mean, I guess that's not exact. Pelton said rookies aren't weighted as heavily, right? Or actually, what's the exact wordage? He might have actually said. Uh, he said the draft isn't weighted as heavily because moves involving NBA veterans, or as moves involving our NBA veterans because of uncertainty about prospects. So why did the Wolves get a C minus if they acquired a top 25 player? They now have two top 25 players in Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, and they have somebody who will be by the end of this season, and that's Anthony Edwards, who probably has, as Simmons said in his trade value column, he's probably in the top 6 or 7 in trade value in the entire league because people think Anthony Edwards could be, an absolute generational superstar, and that transition happens this year. They're going to have 3 top 25 players. I understand Gobert's expensive. I understand he's already 30. I understand that they gave up a lot of picks. But if the exercise is more focused on this year, which it is, and the exercise is focused on how much better a franchise got or the organization got in the offseason, then I don't know how we possibly give that much weight to a bunch of first-round picks. He even admits in his write-up, Pelton says the Timberwolves should be one of the NBA's most improved teams. The question is what the long-term cost will be. Well, if the Wolves are, even if they win 57 games and lose in the second round of the playoffs, which would be disappointing, that first round pick is still going to be like 26 or 24 this season. And you give up 3 or 4 of those that like, they're not going to the most likely scenario is they're a 50 plus win team for at least the next 3 years, right? Assuming Anthony Edwards keeps getting better, you have Cat under contract, you're going to extend Jay McDaniels. Even if Gobert starts to show signs of decline in a couple of years, sure, then we can have the conversation about did they give up way too many draft picks? But if they're a 50 plus win team, these picks are not all that great anyway, which I understand. Again, volume, I get it. I understand that there's a lot of picks involved here. It's really relatively unprecedented in terms of the number of picks they gave up, but they didn't give them up for Kyle Anderson or Malik Beasley or, insert average or slightly above average NBA player here. They gave them up for a top 25 player and a 3-time defensive player of the year who happens to fit. And by happens to, it wasn't a happen to, right? This was by design. he fills their two biggest weaknesses, rebounding and shot blocking. It's just crazy to me that you could give the Timberwolves a C minus for the offseason based on acquiring a top 25 player. It boggles my mind. And also, by the way, there's some other stuff in some of these grade lists that make it seem even crazier. So like the Nuggets got a B minus. I don't understand how the Nuggets offseason was seen as that successful. They had DeAndre Jordan, who couldn't stay on the floor last year. Like I don't under I again, I get that the Wolves are docked because they lose all these picks, but giving the Nuggets a B minus and the Timberwolves a C minus, the Lakers get a B minus for their offseason. Memphis got a C plus, which is probably about right. There's some other just kind of bonkers grades in here. But anyway, that's Pelton's grades. I want to look at CBS and also the Athletic here next, and talk a little bit more about why I think uh, what is still getting undersold with the Rudy thing, mostly in light of the CBS commentary. And then I want to get to potential minor, I'll say it's not a minor player, a player who is a rotation player that the Wolves have been connected to is possibly interested in a trade. He's currently a rotation player for a team that he's been with for several years. So we're going to get into that here next. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sport wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores to podcasts. They have you covered. By the way, last night, Thursday night, was the Hall of Fame game for the NFL, the first NFL preseason game. So if that's your thing, or if NFL is your thing, shake off some of that rust. If you haven't been on BetOnline this offseason, check out some NFL preseason upcoming. I'm sure there's some this weekend on NFL Network or whatever local station they air preseason games. Just shake off some rust with NFL betting, and the regular season is like a month away now. It's crazy. We're there. And then following shortly after that is of course NHL, and then we got NBA kicking off again. And baseball's ongoing. There's plenty to check out at BetOnline. You can head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's keep talking about some of these crazy offseason grades. Let's go to CBS, and this is uh, Colin Ward Henniger, who does a lot of the NBA writing at CBSSports.com. He did his offseason grades, and he has the Timberwolves similarly to Pelton over at ESPN, who had them at C minus. He gives them a C, and he says, I'll just read what Colin wrote at CBSSports.com. He says, "Well, okay then. We saw lots of teams stand pat and build around the fringes, but the Wolves jumped into the deep end with no life vest, trading a billion picks and players to pair Gobert with the newly extended Towns. It's a unique lineup combination that could yield positive results in the regular season. The questions surround Gobert's playoff impact and how he will age until his monster contract expires in the summer of 2026. Kyle Anderson, is a key addition who allows the Wolves to go small if necessary, while Prince, Forbes, and potentially more will add shooting. Overall, it was of course, Prince was already on the team, but I guess they extended him. Overall, it was a huge gamble and a huge price, too high of a price in the humble opinion of this reporter, but it will all be worth it if it translates to playoff wins." And he gives them a C. Okay, couple things. I'm not worried about the playoff impact nearly as much. We talked about this right after the trade. I think that is so much a function of, and I don't want to launch completely back into this, but if you missed it, it's perimeter defense, perimeter defense, perimeter defense, perimeter defense. The Jazz had zero. The Wolves have plenty now with Jaden McDaniels. Anthony Edwards is a good perimeter defender on ball. They've added Kyle Anderson. Obviously, they've added guys. Taurean Prince is a plus defender, an above average defender. Austin Rivers is probably about an average defender. Jordan McLaughlin, yes, is small, but he's an okay perimeter defender. They're all better than everybody. You say for maybe Royce O'Neal, who actually wasn't that great last year for Utah. They're better than Bogdanovich, than Donovan Mitchell, than at least what we saw last year, than late stage career Mike Conley, than Jordan Clarkson. Like, insert Jazz player on the wing here, and every one of them is worse than basically every perimeter defender for the Timberwolves, except for there's Jalen Noel's not a good perimeter defender, right? There's a couple, but the Timberwolves already have like 4 perimeter defenders that are better than what Utah had over the last couple of years. And that's what makes the difference. Rudy doesn't have to play 2. He doesn't have to guard the paint and guard the corners with this Timberwolves team. At least he should not have to. And that is that is my rebuttal to the playoff thing. He's not going to get played off the floor. And I mean, if you really like, obviously you don't want him to because of what you gave up for him and what he's making. But if he has to get played off the floor, you still have Karl-Anthony Towns. And turns out this was a playoff team last year anyway. So if it helps you win 10 more regular season games and gets you, a couple of playoff wins because of Gobert's defense, because especially if the Wolves get out to a lead, the other team's not dictating terms in the playoffs. I mean, the team that's ahead is dictating terms who's going to have who you're going to have on the floor. If you want to play big, it's hard to get much bigger and better than two all NBA centers, both top 25 NBA players with perfectly meshing skill sets in Gobert and Towns. The other thing I'll say is that I think we're completely underselling. Gobert has played so often with teams where he's had to have a relatively high usage rate. Outside of Donovan Mitchell, and then way back you could look at Gordon Hayward, and more recently, I guess at times Bogdanovich, at times, um, uh, I mean, really, I guess he would be the only other one. At times, Conley, I guess, in terms of higher usage guys, Gobert was asked to do so much, and he could provide the bare minimum offensively for the Wolves. He's filling in Jared Vanderbilt's spot, right? What did Vando do offensively? The bare minimum. So, no, you're not paying him the ridiculous amount of money he's making, and you're not trading multiple draft picks to get him do nothing offensively. But you are acquiring him for his defense and rebounding. You're not acquiring him for his offense. Yes, it's going to make a big difference to have his size and length and feel rolling to the basket and pick and roll game, diving to the rim instead of Jared Vanderbilt. Yes, that will matter. And that's my point. It's not going to be the focal point of the offense. It'll be a fringe benefit of the offense that could develop into something greater. But the defense immediately becomes a top. They were already 12th in the league in defensive rating. They're already now going to be a top 6 or 7 unit almost automatically by adding Rudy Gobert. So again, the C grade is just insane. And given the context of some of the other stuff we're seeing on this list, there was one that I had flagged that is just crazy to me, and now I lost it. But I think it was somebody right next to the Wolves on this list that I was going to mention as just like a crazy grade. He gives the Mavs a C plus. I don't understand in what world you'd give the Mavs a better grade than the Timberwolves in the offseason. It's just even Pelton didn't do that. He gave them, I think he had them in a D. I like it boggles the mind, like I said earlier, that you could give the Timberwolves a C after this offseason. I just don't understand it. And I, like I don't know. I guess the thing is based on these grades, the Wolves could win 57 games, go to the second round, or even maybe the conference finals. And these people grading them, I guess, based on this logic, would say, they gave up 4 picks. It's still a C, or a C minus or whatever. I just don't understand how what we're doing here. Like if we're overweighting this pick in 2027 or 2028 or whatever, more than winning 10 more games and gaining a round in the playoffs this year, and maybe in another year they get to the conference finals or whatever. Where's the line here? Like, what are we doing? How are we quantifying these picks? The last site I want to look at is the Athletic. This one's a little bit different because the way the Athletic did it, this isn't like Hollinger or Vicini or one of these guys. It's actually straight up every beat reporter for each team giving a grade. So John Krasinski does a fantastic job, is close to the team. And I wouldn't say he's necessarily a boundless optimist either, but he gave the Timberwolves an A minus on the offseason, and says, I'll read part of what he said. He said, they knew what they had to do. They had to improve rim protection and rebounding, paraphrasing the first part of it. And then he says, did they overpay for Gobert? Yes, probably. But from a strictly basketball perspective, Gobert covers up so many of the Wolves' weaknesses, and the Wolves can cover up many of Gobert's weaknesses, which is what I was just talking about. He then talks about adding Kyle Anderson, Austin Rivers, Bryn Forbes, extending Taurean Prince, and says it's all in all a great first summer for Connolly on the job. 100% true. This is basically what my analysis is. I don't know how this, like, on its face, the most simple way to say this is, how do you say a team that acquires a top 25 player and now has 2 top 25 players and a top 40 player in Anthony Edwards and a top 80 player in D'Angelo Russell, a legit and also somebody who has legit trade value. He was on the honorable mention trade value list for Bill Simmons, if you want to use that. Jaden McDaniels, that's your starting lineup. If you want to say that acquiring a top 25 player to pair with another one and all these other guys is a C or a C minus, then what are you supposed to do in the offseason, right? Like, if they had gone out and overpaid somebody in free agency, would they have gotten a better grade and been stuck? If they had signed, like, and again, I get it. The contract plus the draft capital. I completely understand how much draft capital this is. But remember, we're talking about the Timberwolves. We're talking about a team that's not going to get somebody in free agency anyway. We're talking about a team that's acquiring a guy who covers their exact weaknesses. There's just so many other layers here I think, to be fair to the exercise, where these national reporters are asked to rank all 30 teams, and they're not going to necessarily consider all the context around it. I think they should. That's kind of the job, right? But the C and the C minus are not, it's not correct. It's just not the right way to look at this offseason. This team's going to be better. They're going to win. They won 46 games last year. They're going to win. Well, I'm not going to predict it yet, but they're going to win mid 50s games this year. And they're going to at least go to the second round of the playoffs. Be a top 5 seed in, as I like to call it, the rough and tumble Western Conference. So I just don't understand how we could be so convinced that this offseason was not a good one on the national level. Okay, let's get to this minor trade rumor. And I say that, but it's also pretty intriguing regarding a rotation player on a team that was very good last season. So we'll get to that here next. All right, one minor trade rumor that came through over the weekend was on Jake Fisher's podcast. Jake Fisher over at Bleacher Report has a podcast called, ironically, because this is what I'm about to do, Please Don't Aggregate This Podcast. I guess I'm aggregating it verbally, which is hopefully less painful than many of the blogs that aggregate out there. Um, he mentions that the Cavs are looking to kind of shift around at the end of the roster, especially if they re-sign Colin Sexton. They'll need to make some space on the roster. He mentions Cedi Osman as a potential trade candidate. He fell out of favor according to well, actually, this is actually from Cleveland.com. This part is so Fisher talks about the Sexton extension and the possibility, and then some of this is also from Chris Fedora at Cleveland.com. He talks about how JB Bickerstaff, the head coach, of course, former Timberwolves assistant coach, didn't have Osman in the rotation at the end of last year. He fell out of favor with Bickerstaff. And then Fisher says the Timberwolves and Celtics are among the teams believed to have checked in on Osman in the past. Now, we don't know how long ago. We don't know if this was Rosas era, if this is Gupta era, if this is Connolly era. No idea. There's no additional context here. So this may not be a current rumor. It could be a very old one. But that got me thinking about the whole Naz Reid thing. I've been talking about the Wolves potentially trading him because, like, hey, you've got Nate Knight. You're going to play Gobert and Towns. You're going to stagger them anyway. Naz isn't going to see very many minutes at the 5. If he plays, it's going to be part of an ultra big lineup. And he's probably behind, frankly. I think there's a good chance he's behind Nate Knight on the depth chart. Or the way I would put it is they're probably equal on the depth chart, and it's going to depend on matchups. You need more offense. You need somebody to replicate the more perimeter style play of Towns. That's more of an Naz Reid. Do you need somebody who's going to bang in there and get rebounds, provide, be a body defensively instead of kind of be long and athletic? Then you want Nate Knight. So I think it's the matchup's going to dictate that matchup, foul trouble, and how each guy's playing, obviously. And Chris Finch does a great job. He's not a Tom Thibodeau or even like Rick Adelman, more of an old school, like, hey, these are the guys that are going to play. These are the 9 guys. Finch will play somebody if more or less or not at all, or heavy minutes if they didn't play the. We saw this with Torian Prince last year, where he had a couple DNP CDs. He just didn't see the floor, and then all of a sudden he was, starting or heavily involved in the rotation. And Finch does a good job of keeping the pulse on which guys need to play to stay sharp. Which guys need to play based on a certain matchup, which guys could use a couple of days off. And Finch does a good job at playing around with that. So I think that might be what we see out of the Knight Reid dynamic this year. But I've been talking about for several weeks now that it wouldn't surprise me if the Wolves move Naz Reid for some draft capital, 1 or possibly 2 future second-round picks. So then I saw the Osman rumor, and I was like, well, the Wolves, they have, 19 contracts. They could technically take on another contract, although of the 19 contracts, they do have 15 NBA standard contracts. Now, they're not fully guaranteed. We talked about this. It was on Wednesday's show earlier this week, that the Wolves have 4 guys with partially guaranteed deals. So they could waive one of them and eat some cash, or they could trade one of them or whatever. But they already have 15 standard contracts. So if they were going to trade for Cedi Osman, they'd have to trade somebody on the roster And while I do think Osman fits this roster well and could make some sense, he arguably had the best season of his career last year. Not probably really not even arguably. Um, he had his highest free throw rate, highest since his rookie year, highest 3-point rate, his highest 3-point percentage in the last couple of years, the best assist rate of his career, the lowest turnover rate of his career. He was actually a pretty good player last year with a smaller role in Cleveland as he was a full-time bench player and he only started 3 games and had his lowest minutes average per game since his rookie year. So kind of embraced the smaller role. He's got his issues defensively, but he's at least a bigger body and was actually a little bit better defensively last year when called upon. It's an area he's improved in. But from a roster balance perspective, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. The Wolves front court, well, it is, I would say, loaded. I mean, you have, again, 2 top 25 players, 2 of the best centers in the league. You've also got Kyle Anderson, who's going to play heavy minutes at the 4. You've got Naz Reid and you've got Nate Knight, who are both 5s that can play the 4. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to trade one of those guys and add another wing to a group that, what's Osman going to play? He's primarily going to play the 3, the ability to guard some 2s and play some, small ball 4. But I mean, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Jalen Noel, Taurean Prince, Austin Rivers, Bryn Forbes, and then you've got the rookies, Wendell Moore, Josh Minott. Like, where's Osman playing? He's not playing ahead of Noel or Prince. He's obviously not playing ahead of Edwards or McDaniels. So now he's competing with Rivers for basically that 5th wing spot. And remember, Kyle Anderson can play some 3 too. If you bump everybody down a rung, and Bryn Forbes could play some too. So like, I just don't think that the Osman thing makes a ton of sense. But I say again from a roster balance perspective because Naz is more valuable as like call him your 4th big, sure, if you or 5th big, I guess if you consider Kyle Anderson a big, and if you put Nate Knight ahead of Naz, I don't think that trading Naz now makes a ton of sense. However, later into the season, before we get to those guarantee dates, perhaps there's a team that's interested in Naz and wants to take on the guarantee. Maybe it is Cleveland. Cleveland likes to play big. I mean, their roster, they just signed, I think it's Robin Lopez, yeah, is on the Cavs now. And they have a 2-way that's a 7-footer. So they've got like 5 or 6 7-footers, but they do like to play big. So depending on how the first part of the year shakes out, they could be a team to watch if the Wolves like Osman and are willing to trade Naz Reid. Maybe it's Osman in a second rounder for Naz, or maybe it's straight up at that point. Maybe the roster balancing move makes more sense depending on how the start of the season goes, or it may not be Cleveland at all. It was just Cedi Osman's name that stuck out in this rumor that stuck out. Maybe Naz goes somewhere else in December or early January prior to that guarantee date of I think January 10th when his contract becomes fully guaranteed. Is there another team that says we want Naz? We'll guarantee the rest of his contract. We'll trade you a second rounder. Then the Wolves can go out and sign a buyout candidate before that deadline. They can sign some 10-day players and whatever and fill out the roster that way. If they find some more depth type guys after trading Naz Reid. So Osman's a name to look out for, I guess, just because the Wolves were rumored to be interested. I don't think that's a current rumor simply based upon the roster. They've got like 6 guys that play Cedi Osman's position. Even if Osman had a good year last year, he's entered his prime at age 27. I don't think he's a likely trade target, but someone to keep in mind. I still think Naz Reid is a trade candidate. I'm starting to think it's not before the season. I think it very well could be in season. We're looking at November, December, early January prior to the January 10th guarantee deadline. If the Wolves want to do some additional roster tweaking, he would be the guy I'd continue to keep an eye out for as a potential trade candidate. All right. That's all I have for you today here on the show. We'll be back, of course, on Monday. 3 shows again next week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thank you again to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms from Apple to Google, Spotify to Odyssey. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. You can also make your second listen Locked On NBA. Get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the league in just 30 minutes every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA, your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.